Welcome, fellow horror hounds, and welcome to the latest episode of Talk and Stalk, your unholy home for horror. I'm your host, Barry. I'm joined today by my corrupted co-host, the sadist Samuel.
Thank you kindly, good sir, and welcome back to our dark descent into the notorious, the infamous, the unseen, and even the obscene of the finest genre out there.
Now, the topic of discussion is going to be a film that we just recently watched. Admittedly, it's been a few years since I've seen it. It is actually, to me at least, deemed to be the weakest film in the franchise. And that is actually Scream 3, having been released back in 2000. Obviously, we recently did podcasts on Scream 1 and 2, which are two films that we both really like. We just watched Scream 3. Where should we start on this? It's the weakest film in the franchise to me. I do think that Scream 4 was actually an improvement on the third movie. I actually feel like this film was the franchise was actually starting to become a parody of itself at this point. It almost felt like it was becoming the very kind of film that the first two films were actually wryly mocking. What do you think, Samuel?
Oh, it's the one that left the least of an impression on me. I don't know where to start with that, really. I do know that, I guess on a production note, that it tailored more to the comedic elements because of the Columbine Massacre in 1999. So whilst that's understandable, it did play more on the comedic elements that I struggled with. And I think you kind of saw it on us rewatching it. It just really wasn't. I just was not that impressed by it.
I think Scream 3 ultimately it really lacks because Kevin Williamson actually wrote the screenplay for the first two Scream films. I think both of them films had really good screenplays. He actually wrote a draft. He wrote a basic outline for the third movie, but it was actually Aaron Kruger that took over writing duties, and I really feel like Kevin Williamson's writing was sorely lacking here. As I say, it was Aaron Kruger who took over the writing duties, and he couldn't really match Williamson, to be honest. The script just lacks the bite, and, even the wit of what them first two films did. What do you think to that, Samuel?
Well, it's kind of like what we talked about with The West Wing. When Aaron Sorkin departed, the sort of bite with the screenplay is just completely missing. And I feel exactly the same with right here. There feels like a sense of almost exhaustion with the source material because of how unenthused the writing seems to be. I mean, like, the irony being is that it's supposed to be a little bit more comic. I didn't find it anywhere near as funny as the first film. And of course, because of and then I suppose with the horror elements as well, I don't even know if you can really say it as such. It just didn't have the same level of darkness as the second one.
No, I mean, let's just start with the intro. Now, the opening scenes in the first and two were impactful. Certainly. I mean, the first has gone on to become a pretty iconic opening in horror history. Scream 2 was a great opening. The third one just doesn't have any impact. It obviously results in the big death of Cotton Weary, but again, I mean, Cotton Weary actually is the first character in the trilogy at this point, a returning character to actually be killed, but there's just no investment there whatsoever. It kind of makes me laugh, actually, because his girlfriend is actually killed very shortly before him, yet there's absolutely no mention of her murder whatsoever. Everyone talks about Cotton's murder, she gets killed, and because obviously she's not a major character or anything, she's dismissed through the rest of the movie. I do know that there were kind of alternate openings to this movie. This is the one that they settled on, and I do know that Aaron Kruger, writing this film, it was very quickly written. And I think in a way it probably kind of shows. This film was very hastily written. But saying that, Kevin Williamson, midway through the first Scream, had already kind of started writing Scream 2. And he did a great job with that. I just don't think Aaron Kruger has what Williamson has. Now, Aaron Kruger's done some other good stuff, but I just don't think that he was the right man for a project like this. let's talk about Nev Campbell. Let's talk about Sidney Prescott. I like what they did with her in this movie regarding she's living under a false name now, an alias, a crisis counsellor. What did you think? It kind of hit upon the kind of thing that this woman would be doing now in her life.
I think it was a nice development for her character. The fact of like, as a survivor, she's able to use that to provide guidance and support. And then they go further with diving into, I guess, elements of her past, which is a gamble. However, it's interesting, I think, when you see it from Sydney's perspective.
Yeah, I think they do a really good job actually with the character of Sidney Prescott over the course of this trilogy at this point, because obviously Scream 4 didn't come out until 11 years later. Obviously David Arquette, Dewey, and Gail Weathers, Courtney Cox, great chemistry. I mean, there's absolutely no denying these two are great on screen together. Dewey is a Looney Tunes character.
Yeah.
Looney Tunes. I feel like Dewey should have his own sitcom. He's just, I mean, the killer in this movie could actually kill him about 20 times over. He's got more lives than a cat, and I've said this before. But clearly he's a popular character, and it's almost like they're scared to kill him off. Like I said, him and Gail, great chemistry and all that. I really like the characters, but at the same time, I believe in taking big risks. And I really feel as though Dewey should be killed off at some point, or at least Gail. You know, there's got to be that kind of... We had Randy killed off in Scream 2, which was a gut punch, but a lot of people were really annoyed with that. I believe that Wes Craven even got hate emails over that, which is why, ironically, Randy was brought in via video for the third movie. It's the best they could do with bringing Randy back. They couldn't exactly reanimate his corpse with a bolt of lightning or anything like that, so they had to bring him back via video. Yeah, come on, Dewey and Gail. What do you think? What do you think to these two characters in the course of the third movie?
Well, I think it's still the similar cycle of they reunite and they clearly just have this sort of love-hate for each other. The chemistry, shines on through. There's no question about that. It's just, we kind of get an idea, we kind of seen the formula before. I mean, it doesn't have the same sweetness as, say, the first time when they first interact in the first Scream film. But that said, we do have a very nice closure, I guess you could say.
Yeah, it's a very love-hate relationship. I'll say this, there is a character in this film I really enjoy, and brand new character for this film, and I really liked the dynamics between this character. Again, it's played for comedic effect. At the end of the day, this film doesn't take itself too seriously at times, and that is Jennifer Parker Posey's character playing the woman that is playing Gail.
Yeah.
Them side by side. She's playing Gail Weathers. They're bouncing off each other really well. And it's really ironic, actually. I love this little moment where Gail Weathers, obviously, in the first two films, she's been knocked out. She's been punched by Sidney. And this time she does the punching. She does punching to Gail Weathers, the woman playing Gail Weathers. I thought that was a nice little touch. But yeah, there's a lot of comedy in this movie. And, let's get on to the other characters, because a lot of the other characters in this film, I mean, you've got Lance Henriksen in there,
which I think it's very clear we're very fond of him, playing as the director John Milton. Regardless, there was a cameo from Roger Corman as well. Maybe that's literally just in one bit as well.
Yeah.
Henriksen's character definitely has some interesting elements. He does touch on things that I guess you could say touches on some topics that are still relevant for today. However, we won't delve too much into that. He was pleasant enough. I guess I want a little bit more of him. However, then again, that's just because I like Henriksen. Whether or not his character actually should have had more screen time, that's a different story.
Yeah, I don't think there's many people out there that dislike Henriksen. I think Henriksen's always a welcome addition to any film, and he plays John Milton, the film producer. He's not in the film too long. He's actually a suspect. When I first watched this film, he was kind of a suspect to me. Obviously, there are spoilers in this. I'm assuming everyone listening to this has seen Scream 3. The killer, of course, is Roman Bridger, which is quite notable because it's the only film in the franchise to have one killer. And I'm like, this guy's been seriously busy. I mean, I don't even know if this is possible for one guy to have orchestrated all of this during the course of the movie, but never mind.
And that's the problem. When we start picking it apart and we see some of his methods, we do go, how does that work? I think so. Okay, so what should be our starting point? The first thing I think we need to address is the device. Is that he uses to alter his voice. I'm happy. Look, I understand because of it being 2020. I understand if the altering voice device does happen. I mean, the only time I've seen that is like in Batman Arkham Knight.
Yeah, Roman Bridger has clearly got technology that's kind of very up there with Batman. To be honest, it's nothing more than a gimmick, and it's just one I was never on board with. I'm watching it and I'm thinking this is ridiculous. Basically, obviously, as you all know, the killer can actually disguise his voice as many other characters in the movie. He's Gale at one point, he's Sidney Prescott and Dewey, and I'm like, where is he gaining access to all of these characters' voices? And not only that, how does it sound so perfect? It's a device that to me just doesn't work. It's ridiculous. I don't even think that it's actually used to necessarily great effect either. I get what they were trying to do. They were trying to put something new in this film. They were trying to do something a little different. It's just something that doesn't work for me.
And then the other part that doesn't really work, I suppose, is the twist, the revelation of the relation to that of Sydney. Now, I think on the one hand, it kind of, the revenge aspect does make sense. However, it just... What was it you compared it to? It was Halloween. What, Halloween 2?
Yeah, well, basically in this movie, it's kind of notable because actually, you know, Jamie Kennedy's character, Randy, actually makes this statement in Scream, is that if they watch Prom Night, they save time. Because the killer in Prom Night is actually the brother of one of the lead girls, played by Jamie Lee Curtis. Michael Myers is the brother of Laurie Strode in the original timeline, obviously not the current timeline now. And this follows the brother theme. The brother who clearly has, you know, a vendetta against Sydney, etc. The problem with this is, I get what they're doing. They've got a third film. They want to flesh it out. They want to dive into the backstory. But by doing that, you're going to end up convoluting things and contradicting events that have happened prior. And what this does is kind of undercuts and lessens the impact in a way of what Billy and Stu did in the first movie.
Oh, absolutely. The sort of the drive of revenge, which I think is so much more potent and more terrifying in the original Scream, is very much undercut. And the same with Stu's joyous sadism of planning to do a sequel. Because if it's all part of a like a much bigger picture, you just go, well, what's the point of the motive? They were just putting on an act rather than you realise they're just putting on an act. They're just acting and they're not being naturalistic with their sort of sadism.
Yeah. It's one of them. I mean, with Roman Bridger now again, there's kind of a little nod here to Scream 2 actually, because actually there's a mention of this in the film, talking about one of the characters actually they wrote 3 different scripts in this film, which is a nod to Scream 2, because I believe there were actually 3, possibly more. I think it was 3 though. 3 screenplays that were actually written, 3 scripts, because they were worried of internet leaks, and there is actually a mention of that in this film. 3. We didn't know which of the 3 scripts the killer was actually basing the murders on, etc. With Roman Bridger being the killer, the whole kind of, I get it, the personal aspect and all this and that, but as I say, it just kind of, it undercuts the first movie. Now, this is the problem when you're building a franchise and stuff. I mean, how else do you do it? Do you kind of like just another someone that comes into Sydney's life that decides they want to be a killer? This is a problem with creating a franchise, because we're not dealing with just a Jason Voorhees type here who just kills for the sake of it. There's got to be a motive there. Typically a motive, so they had to establish a motive. Now, I know in the original script there were going to be changes of killers. I do believe that one of the police officers, not Kincaid but the other one, in one of the original drafts was actually going to be a killer.
That I could see.
I don't know how he was going to be wrote into it, what the personal aspect was or whatever. Let's quickly talk about Kincaid played by Patrick Dempsey. Don't know about you, first viewing, he was a strong suspect for me.
Again, it was too. See, for me, it was sort of like the whole Cotton Weary thing with this with Scream 2. It seemed too in your face. I felt like, no, you are too much of a red herring, too suspicious. Was it too disarmingly suspicious and yet suspiciously disarming? So yeah. I didn't.
So
suspect.
Upon first viewing, then who was your suspect?
I didn't guess. I just went along with it.
Oh, okay.
So after Scream 2, I was like, do you know what? I'm going to stop guessing. I'm just going to let go with it. But I wish I had more of that.
I think kind of the twist was that it was one killer, because we'd got used to just 2 films in, like 2 killers with each film.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of people were probably looking out for 2 potential killers and that. But this film is. I mean, Jenny McCarthy's in there, the Playboy model. Obviously, she's not much of an actress. She's got very little in the way of screen time. It's ironic, actually, because she talks about only having 2 scenes in the script before she's killed. She has 2 scenes in this movie before she's killed.
Yeah. And yet she has less screen time than Connie Mason in Blood Feast, another Playboy model as well.
Yeah. With this movie, I mean, it's like I said, by this point in the franchise, it's kind of like it's following the motions. It is almost becoming, like I said, there's some kind of Looney Tune-esque moments in this film, particularly with Dewey. There's also another moment where a character is running along and the ghost face just pulls the rug from under his feet. It's kind of cartoon. I mean, in a real world, you probably would do that, but I mean, let's talk about some of the cameos. Now, there's one of which that is very forced.
Oh, you mean Kevin Smith, Silent
Jay
Bob,
and
and
Silent
Jay,
Bob,
which is like I think it layers on it too much. Whereas I feel like we were talking about this, the Wes Craven's own cameo in the first Scream, I think was a stroke of genius because it was such a brief moment.
It was a great cameo.
And
having Linda Blair as a blink and you'll miss it news reporter as well.
Yeah. Whereas with these two, I mean, I really like Clerks and Clerks 2. Although actually, the Americans call it Clerks and Clerks 2, so I'm going to call it as the Americans and say so. Apologies on that one. I really like Mallrats and I really like Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back. I haven't seen the reboot as they call it as such. Yeah. However, it's just like, where's the relevance? I don't understand where the relevance is. Maybe it's because Kevin Smith is a fan.
There isn't. Maybe Kevin Smith's a fan. I haven't actually looked into that, but Kevin Smith's probably a fan. Jay and Silent Bob are obviously 2 popular characters. Let's just throw him in there. But let's talk about one of the good cameos. Let's talk about a cameo that was quite funny. Seeing Carrie Fisher, but not as Carrie Fisher, as an actress who is the spitting image of Carrie Fisher and blames Carrie Fisher on her not getting a career. I believe her character name, I think it's Bianca Burnett. She's only on screen for like a minute or so, but it's a funny little moment. It's always good to see Carrie Fisher.
Oh, right, the resemblance is so uncanny. And it's like, that in itself is funny because the amount of times she probably bumped into people and the resemblances. Do you remember, there was I think it was a Graham Norton show. Rowan Atkinson said that he bumped into this guy who said, "Oh, my God, the resemblance of you with Mr. Bean is so uncanny." So I suppose that's a nice little reference in society.
Well, I like how she actually mentions that she didn't get the job because she weren't willing to sleep with George Lucas.
Yeah.
I remember George. I don't want to go too off topic here, actually, but I remember George because Carrie Fisher was only 19 years old in the original Star Wars. And George Lucas had actually told her, when she said, like, why am I not wearing a bra? Lucas had actually said, there are no bras in space. Wow. I'm not sure if every pervert would probably say that, but it was a nice little cameo. Again, played for comedic effect, but it did actually push the storyline forwards as well, because we soon come to realise, obviously, who Sydney's mum really was.
Yeah.
They kind of fleshed out a bit of a backstory in that there. And also, obviously, we get Roger Corman.
Yeah, the great B-movie producer as well. I mean, the amount of influence that man has had is absolutely unbelievable.
Yeah, certainly a big name within the genre.
Francis Ford Coppola, Martin Scorsese, a whole list of Jack Nicholson as well. a whole diversity. I'm sure there's plenty of other names that aren't included in that as well. He's had quite a few cameos. He had a cameo in Silence of the Lambs as well. So it makes perfect sense that a master of horror would cast, the master of B movies, into this film.
And it's funny, actually, you mentioned Silence of the Lambs. That film does actually get a name drop. Obviously in the original, but also in this film, we get Silence of the Lambs followed by Seven, quickly by Kincaid. Now, I'm not sure if that was kind of a sly little nod pointing to, he knows his films. With Kincaid, he quickly mentions 2 films, and then obviously Sidney Prescott's in the room with him, and she says, "Oh, you like movies." I feel like the film was pointing the finger at Kincaid on quite a few occasions with that. Even Emily Mortimer, who plays the actress that's playing Sydney in the film, obviously there's that scene, isn't there, in the toilet, where she's actually... it looks like she's trying on the Ghostface costume.
Yeah.
But of course, apparently she's stealing the souvenirs. So she was also kind of a suspect. That was actually a recreation as well. I read that the whole toilet there, was an exact replica of the toilet in the original movie.
That makes perfect sense. They did a very good job with the sets, particularly with creating the house. That is one thing I will commend it for. It was good to see a really accurate kind of replica of Woodsboro. Her going through there. And there's one other scene in this film that I think you'd probably agree for this franchise, at this point in the franchise, was kind of creepy. The dream sequence. Oh,
seeing her mum walking towards...
See, I was a little sceptical with that at first because of the implications of supernatural elements. So at first I was like, I'm not too sure about this. However, I suppose in the broader context of it, do you know what?
It is just a dream sequence.
Yeah, and obviously thank goodness.
Yeah, with what's going on in her life at the time, and obviously, her mother, etc. And then obviously, it ends with a jump scare, shock horror with Ghostface appearing up and that. But yeah, I mean, Scream 3, it has a lot of issues. I mean, this isn't really saying much. It's probably one of the better third installments of a slasher franchise, though. I think now, Scream 3, I don't think Scream 3 is what I'd call a terrible movie. It's just the first 2 films are so damn good. And the third one can't get anywhere near.
I know, and that in itself, I think, is the part that's just so dispiriting. Just such a drop, though. I mean, like the arguments that people have had with Scream 2. But how is it possible that this is as good as the original? But oh boy,
yeah, moments like with Dewey being knocked out with a knife.
And the amount of times we kept questioning these things as well. It's just, okay, fine, we get that there's the slasher formulas as well. However, the further you go into modernizing all this stuff with the technology, I mean, what was it? There's a whole chase in the mansion, and they say, okay, quickly call someone. And then, what was it? I think one of us just said, why didn't you do that like 5 minutes ago?
Yeah, it felt quite Scooby-Doo-esque at times. And like the killer's always kicking Dewey, punching Dewey, but he's quick to stab everyone else. Well, honestly, he's quick to stab everyone else, but chooses to just punch and kick Dewey. Now, I understand this is the script. Dewey's a popular character. I honestly think they're scared of killing him off. I really do, because of the backlash with Randy. But like I said, I think Randy's death was a great moment, actually, because do you know what? It was in broad daylight, it was unexpected, and it was a gut punch. It was a character that was popular, they took a risk, and do you know what? To me, I like that when they take risks. But they don't seem like they're willing to take that risk.
Now,
Dewey.
See, the thing is, I think we were talking about this in terms of Scream 5 of what may happen. I honestly do think if they go down the road of mocking films that emphasise on nostalgia, they're going to play on that, be like, hey, introduce these new characters. They have Dewey. Oh, Dewey, just like in the original films. And then they kill him off. They probably kill him off. Yeah. I can imagine them doing that with Scream 5. And to be honest, I'd be happy with that. It's not because I don't like Dewey. We all love him. It's just more of like, that's kind of the formula that's been happening with all these nostalgic films. And it'd be fun for it to prod it and actually take proper risks.
Yeah. Now, I know this film... We said about Williamson, it's not as good because Williamson wasn't writing. And this film was written very quickly, actually. I know there was a few rewrites, etc. And it probably shows. It probably does show. It probably isn't as good as what it could have been. I'll admit, I still find it fun. I still actually find it enjoyable. But yeah, it just can't get anywhere close to the first two Scream films. No death in this movie was impactful.
No.
None.
And that in itself, that's another issue. And I know you could say it's entertaining or fun to watch. That for me becomes part of the problem, because it's I think, as we pointed out earlier, the horror had to be toned down for some reasons. However, I just didn't find it as funny. So, horror, I mean, what was so great about the first film was that you could have fun with being scared, and you could, and it was quite scary. It was very intense.
Scream had an intensity to it. Even Scream 2 had its moments
and it
of
had some
intensity.
Real dark themes, as we talked about earlier, the other day. But with this, though, it's just like, I found it neither scary nor funny, and that is a big problem. It's kind of like, I don't know, Army of Darkness. Like, that is a similar case in the fact of it's not scary. It has some fun. Maybe have some funny moments. However, it's just nothing compared to the originals.
Yeah, I think with this movie, a lot of the humour for me does come from, like I said, the relationship, the bouncing off with Parker Pose's character and Gail Weathers.
Yeah.
I thought that was an interesting dynamic. That was. Aside from them, I mean, there's no other characters that really come into this film that make any kind of an impact really whatsoever. But it is one of them. That's the trend of slasher movies, though. I think Scream 3 is following that trend of slasher movies where the characters are disposable.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? We don't really get to know them or anything like that, and they're literally on screen and they're there to be killed. And there was just nothing. There's no scene really, aside from maybe some of the humorous moments, which I think some of the humour worked for me. Some of it didn't. I think it relied a little too heavily at times, but some of it did work. There's just no real scenes in there that really jump out. Now, there is some dynamics I like between Sydney and her brother at the end. The kind of, which he says, you know why you're doing this, because you like doing it. Don't blame, on this bullshit and all this and that. You're a psychopath, etc. And I really felt that kind of intensity from Roman Bridger between, brother and sister and so forth. But again, it's just ultimately, that's interesting, by the way. He's the only killer in the first 3 films to actually be killed in his Ghostface costume. He's still wearing the Ghostface costume during the entire scene.
And he's the only one who, at no point that ended up trying to blame the movies either. He's just, we had the first one, don't blame the movies, but the second one, don't blame the parents. This time round, don't blame me.
Yeah.
So I think that is an interesting account. That the fact of you have these vengeful people that blame the world and blame others for their own faults.
Yeah.
So that is interesting. The problem is though, is that it doesn't have as much of a depth as the others, and I think that's a shame because of the layers you could pull back. I mean, it's like we talked about with Scream 2. You have all these really unsettling layers of themes. Whereas at this time round, I mean, no, I admit, the chemistry, the interactions between the brother and sister are very, very good, and there is a real sense of rage and contempt.
Yeah.
It's just, I just don't feel like it's just enough really to get to, that you're scared of him.
Yeah. I mean, I think that Sidney Prescott, Neve Campbell, is fantastic as a final girl. I think
definitely.
She's great. Okay, admittedly, I've not seen her in much else. I know that, Par Year 5 is the TV show that really made her famous now, so I can't really comment on her in that. But I think she's great. I actually think she's a really good final girl. I think the casting's great for the most part in this entire franchise.
No,
I think the casting is generally very good. Roman Bridger, didn't see it coming, never, because they played that Agatha Christie, and then there were none, kind of fakes his own death. The kind of Billy Loomis moment, if you will.
Yeah.
Except they don't never build him up to be the possible killer. They just have his body in the coffin. I mean, my fiance mentioned earlier, actually, it's like, didn't she check the pulse? I mean, I don't know how he lowered his pulse or anything, but he's in there, apparently killed in that. How the hell did he lower his pulse to fake his death there?
I suppose the role of Michael York comes into play.
Yeah.
For those of you who aren't familiar, it's from Austin Powers' The Spy Who Shagged Me, and the rule is, I suggest you don't worry about that sort of thing and just enjoy yourself.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, overall, Scream 3, it's just, yeah, it's just one of them. It's not one that I return to often. I've seen the first two films loads of times, and the third one, I mean, I'll return to it again at some point, but it's not a film that I'm in a hurry again to watch. But thankfully, Scream 4, Kevin Williamson came back on board. And even though the fourth film certainly, without a doubt, is not as good as the first two, I do think it's a step up from the disappointing third movie.
Oh, definitely, because it regains some of the sharpness. It's a shame, though, that it took such a long time to get back into it. Although, I mean, because in terms of the finances, they dropped down quite a bit. So, although that said, Scream 3 only made around $10, maybe $12 million less than Scream 2. So it wasn't as if it was it wasn't a box office disaster.
No, Scream 3 did well. Scream 3 is, upon release in 2000, was the third highest grossing slasher film of all time. The top three were Scream, Scream 2 and Scream 3. It was a box office success. It was, slasher at its most commercial. Scream 4, unfortunately, made less. The only film in the franchise to make less than $100 million. Now, I don't know if that's because there was an 11-year gap. I'm not sure if it's because interest had waned somewhat or people were very sceptical because they didn't like the third. But yeah, for whatever reason, the fourth film made less money than what the third film did.
Oh, there's going to be all kinds of factors coming into play with that one. I think we will never know for definite what those are. Maybe it could be deemed as perhaps too little, too late, perhaps. I mean, as we both agree, I think we do think it is better than the third one. However, maybe the third one had that much of an impact. Although, I think, because it considered as a closing point, I guess no one really asked for it.
Well, even with the fourth one, we were never certain that we were going to get a fourth one.
Yeah.
The fourth one was in talks for, like I say, an 11-year gap between the third and fourth. We never knew we were going to get that.
Or a TV show, for that matter.
No.
Or the Scream 5, for that matter.
Yeah. Let's just quickly talk about one thing that we just briefly touched upon. Let's talk about Randy's video. Because obviously Randy was one of the most popular characters in the first two films, killed off, much to the annoyance of some people. Brought back for the third one as a video. Again...
it's better than
to
nothing.
The point, to the point of like, oh god, really? Did this really happen? Quite comedic, actually. And he brings up the rules of a trilogy. Now, let's face it, there aren't many horror trilogies out there. Most horror franchises don't get to 3 films or go way beyond 3.
Yeah, and even there's some trilogies that they're not even consistent. The one that actually comes to mind is the Hostel trilogy. I mean, the third one
straight to DVD, set in Vegas.
Yeah, it has no real connection to the second film whatsoever.
No, there aren't many horror trilogies out there. There are very few now because they often go beyond, be it 4 films, 5 films, or just the 2. There's not a huge amount of horror. So he talks about the rules. The killer's going to be superhuman this time. You can't kill him. So obviously we've got a killer bulletproof vest this time round, which makes sense. But you kind of think to yourself, the killer would be wearing them in the first 2 films as well.
Only if they had access to it, though.
Yeah. But and then of course, what was the second rule again?
Well, one of them is
the past coming back to bite you.
Yeah, to bite you in the ass. And the other one is that if there's anything up for grabs, anyone can die, including you, Sydney.
Yeah.
So, and that in itself becomes another real sucker punch moment because it warns the idea that anyone could die, and then it plays with that. Like, did they really do that? And you realise, no, actually, it doesn't feel like there's really much of a stakes.
We thought Sydney was going to die. Sydney was shot, and all Roman Bridger had to do was aim for the head.
How did you fail that shot?
I don't think he failed. I think he just purposely went for the chest. Which is ridiculous. You want to kill this person. What's the best way? You're literally about 2 feet away from him.
I don't think so. I think he just sucked at it because, I mean, come on. I mean, the face he pulls when she disappears. Like, perhaps he did do it on purpose. Still, though, like, why?
Yeah.
Well, okay,
we know why the script wouldn't allow for Sydney to be killed off. Now, we don't actually know yet at the moment if Neve Campbell's going to be back for the 5th film. I certainly expect her to be. I know she's apprehensive because I've talked about this before because of Wes Craven's passing. But, David Arquette and Courtney Cox are both on board, etc. They've just recently cast someone else for the 5th movie. Now, I don't recall his name, but he's one of the lead actors in The Boys. and he's actually Dennis Quaid's son.
Oh.
He's been cast in a role for Scream 5, which obviously isn't out until January 2022. But, I mean, overall, takeaway for Scream 3, what would you say? Would you say Scream 3's a terrible film or just a very disappointing film?
Oh, disappointing. I think if I was to give it some sort of recommendation, I'd say it's at least worth a rent on Amazon Prime, at least, if you're apprehensible in wanting to explore the Scream franchise even further. Any summarising thoughts from you?
Scream 3, I really enjoyed it upon first release at the cinema. I knew it was certainly nowhere near as good as the first two. I'll admit I still enjoy it, but it has a lot of problems. Yeah. It just, tonally speaking, it's really quite different to the first two. It's very meta, isn't it? It's very meta. It's like they went all out meta with this movie. Characters playing characters in this film, etc. Which was kind of interesting. You had Jenny McCarthy. There was a little nod to Vertigo there. She meant to say Psycho, but it clearly shows you how much of a dumb blonde. Sorry if there's any blonde listeners out there, but yeah, like plays on that dumb blonde kind of thing and that. It's fun, but it's just ultimately Scream 3 is kind of, to me, the forgettable one, the really forgettable one in the franchise. But which is a shame because Neve Campbell's great in it again. I think they do some good stuff with her. I think they do, touching upon this tortured girl who just wants to lead a normal life. She has to go into hiding. Do you know what I mean? And it's completely ruined her life. And there's some good stuff in there. There are some good stuff, but it's kind of few and far between.
Oh yeah, definitely. I think there are touching of survivor's guilt in there as well, which I think is something that most of these Final Girl films don't really explore. So there's a nice real fleshing out, and the closure is very nice, not just for doing Gale, but also for Sydney as well. That is, before Scream 4, there was some pleasant closure in those that she's able to move on with her life.
Yeah, but it must be interesting as well. There's a lot of people that were potentials to actually star in this movie. I've heard that Alicia Silverstone and Ben Affleck were actually considered for roles in this film.
I could see that.
Faurizia Balk, I believe. Obviously, her first film was Return to Oz back in '85. She was considered. I also read that Wes Craven himself was going to play the role of John Milton, which actually went to, of course, Lance Henriksen.
See, I think that would have been way too meta to the point of like Wes Craven's New Nightmare.
Yeah, I actually watched that recently. I don't want to get too much off topic now, but Wes Craven's New Nightmare, I love. I think that's a really good slice of postmodern horror. I really do. It has become a lot more appreciated over the years, and that upon release, obviously, it didn't do too well at the box office. I think, like I said, it was too meta, too probably over too many people's heads, and it relied heavily on one's knowledge of the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise as well, because film has loads of little Easter eggs and parallels to the original movie, etc. I think Wes Craven's New Nightmare is one of his best films. But yeah, that's the overall summary for me. Scream 3, kind of fun, but at the same time, it's really weak compared to the first two movies.
Oh, well, that's the thing. I mean, I can't even say it's boring. I will give it that much.
Yeah, also, it must be noted that apparently that Kevin Williamson did write an outline for this, right? And apparently echoes of that, certain aspects of his outline and that, found their way to a TV show called The Following with Kevin Bacon.
Yeah, oh yes.
Well, apparently the whole outline of that show and story was originally going to be utilised for Scream 3.
Okay, well then
in other words, it was going to be multiple killers. That presumably the killer from the first film, Stu and Billy and so forth, had followers, a fan base.
I'd be up for seeing that. It's like the actual copycat crime.
Yeah.
But
that was the original outline, and it wasn't used. Aaron Kruger wrote his own stuff, and it was used for The Following instead.
Actually, that kind of makes sense in relation to Columbine with the fear of copycat crimes. That might have also been another factor as well, just on a sort of a cynical note, if you like.
Yeah. But, we just watched it recently. First time in a long time for both of us. We kind of enjoyed it and that. But, Yeah, I mean, I don't know what we can expect anymore, really. You know, we had two great first and second installments and that, and I think it's going to be tough. I think it's going to be really tough to get anywhere near them first two films.
To be honest, part of me is like, I don't even want to see them try because they all seem too painful. However,
I'm still excited for Scream 5, but very, very apprehensive at the same time. But I think that's because I'm like a bit of a fanboy as well. I just want to see the Ghostface costume back. I want to hear the telephone calls. But that's another thing that's got to be quickly noted. The telephone calls in the third one are kind of bland.
Yeah.
There's just nothing... In the first one, Billy Loomis had a real sense of menace, like the lines, like, I want to know who I'm looking at. And if you hang up on me and I'll gut you like a fish, there was a real sense of Billy Loomis, you know. With this, there was nothing that really stood out.
Yeah, and I think that's the biggest problem. There's a joke I remember some filmmaking was that, the third one's always the worst. And which, ironically, that in itself was a rubbish film in itself. I can't remember what it was, not worth the time.
Yeah. But, overall, Scream 3, okay. But yeah, it's the only one of the four, actually. I think it's the only one of the four movies that's had so much negative reception.
Yeah.
Even among critics. Even the fourth film was actually regarded as better than the third film.
Not that this is very much at times.
No. But, well, anyway, that's our summary on it. And thanks for listening. I think that concludes today's episode. We'll be back again soon to haunt you, torment you, and do whatever else we want to you.
Thank you once again, and always remember, lock your doors and take care of your loved ones, and always check your beds.
And just remember, movies don't create psychos. Movies make psychos more creative.